They say everyone's got a price. Mine was 3 months behind on rent and the suffocating weight of civilian life crushing me slower than any firefight ever did. That's how I ended up taking the gig, night security at St. Jude's Mercy Hospital. Recently closed, waiting for the wrecking ball, and dripping with the kind of stories that make locals cross the street after dark. I needed the paycheck. What I got was a crash course in why some places should just stay buried. This isn't just another ghost story, it's the reason I flinch at flickering lights and can't stand the smell of bleach anymore. This is why I'll never work security again. Let's begin the story. Get comfortable and listen closely. The keys felt heavy in my hand, colder than the late October air biting at my jacket. St. Jude's Mercy Hospital loomed before me, a hulking silhouette against the bruised twilight sky. Part imposing brick reminiscent of older institutions, part hastily added concrete wings already streaked with grime. It wasn't just closed, it felt expired. The air hung thick with the ghosts of smells, sharp antiseptic warring with the musty dampness of decay and something vaguely metallic, like old blood soaked into linoleum. Mike Simmons? The voice startled me. A man leaned against the security shack by the main gate, smoke curling from a cigarette cupped in his hand. Older, maybe late 50s, with tired eyes sunk into a roadmap of wrinkles. His security jacket looked as worn out as he did. "Yeah. That's me. Gary." He offered a hand that felt like worn leather. "Welcome to the graveyard shift." Literally. He didn't smile. "Got your paperwork?" I handed over the thin folder the temp agency gave me. Gary barely glanced at it, just grunted and unlocked the main staff entrance, the heavy door groaning in protest. The silence inside was immediate and profound, swallowing the city sounds whole. Emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows down the main corridor, making the empty reception desk look like an abandoned altar. "All right, kid," Gary began, his voice echoing unnaturally. "Tour time. Keep up." He moved with a surprising swiftness born of repetition. "Main lobby, obviously. Security office is down that hall." He pointed with his chin. "Got monitors covering most of the ground floor, ER bay, some upper levels. Keycard access for most areas, but half the readers are shot. Physical keys for the rest." We walked. Miles of corridors, it felt like. Past dark and patient rooms, doors slightly ajar, revealing empty beds stripped bare. Past nurses' stations littered with forgotten charts and dead computer monitors. The sheer scale of the emptiness was unnerving. A place built for hundreds, now occupied by just me and the dust motes dancing in the emergency lighting. "Standard patrols," Gary continued, his tone flat. "Check exterior doors, ground floor windows, make sure no junkies or curious teens decided to make themselves at home. We got motion sensors in key areas, but they're twitchy. Mostly rats." He didn't sound convinced. He pointed to a bank of elevators. "Service elevator's the only one powered. Don't trust the others." Further down, he gestured towards a heavy, double-door section marked with faded lettering, "Psychiatric Ward." Thick chains and a heavy padlock secured it. "That's the old wing. Stay the hell away from it. Doors are sealed for a reason. Place is unstable, structurally," he added, a little too quickly. "And the company doesn't want anyone wandering where they shouldn't." We reached the security office. It was small, cramped, dominated by a bank of flickering CRT monitors showing grainy, black and white feeds of empty hallways, stairwells, and the occasional vacant room. A cheap coffee maker spotted in the corner next to a logbook filled with Gary's bored scrawl. "All right, the system." Gary tapped one of the screens. "Monitor in Ward C flickers like it's having a seizure. Ignore it. Camera 3 in the ER bay sometimes goes dark for a few seconds. Power fluctuation. Don't sweat it." He pointed to a panel with rows of small lights. "Internal alarms. Call buttons, mostly disconnected. Sometimes they light up. Bad wiring. Log it, move on." His briefing was a litany of malfunctions and dismissals. Everything was bad wiring, old systems, drafts, or rats. It felt less like instruction, more like a preemptive excuse for anything weird. "Place makes noises," he said, finally meeting my eye. The weariness was still there, but underneath, a flicker of something else. "Warning? Settling sounds, wind whistling through vents, pipes groaning. Don't let the quiet fool you. It ain't ever really quiet here." He crushed his cigarette butt in a stained ashtray. "My shift's over. You got the logbook, the keys, the radio. Call if something's actually on fire or someone's actively breaking in. Otherwise, just make it till morning." He clapped me on the shoulder, a surprisingly solid thump. "Good luck, kid." And then he was gone, leaving me alone in the humming silence of the security office. The weight of the building seemed to press in on me. I poured myself a cup of gritty coffee and settled in, trying to shake off the unease. I'd seen worse, I told myself. Spent nights in far more dangerous places. This was just a building. An empty, decaying building. My first patrol was surreal. My boots echoed absurdly loud on the polished floors. Each locked door I checked felt final, sealing away unseen spaces. The air grew colder as I moved deeper into the hospital, the antiseptic smell stronger in some areas, overtaken by damp decay in others. I passed the entrance to the old surgical theater, double doors with frosted glass panels, dark beyond. A shiver traced its way down my spine, unrelated to the temperature. Back in the office, I watched the monitors. Empty corridor. Empty waiting room. Empty bed. The flickering screen in Ward C buzzed erratically. Static hissed softly from the PA speaker above the console. Routine. Boring, even. Exactly what I needed. Around 2 a.m., I started my second patrol. Down the long hallway towards the old maternity ward. As I passed room 214, the small call button light above the door flickered on, a soft, insistent red pulse. I stopped, heart giving a nervous jump. I knew Gary said it happened, bad wiring, but seeing it felt different. I pushed the door open. Empty. A bare mattress on the bed frame, dust thick on the windowsill. No one had been in here for months. I checked the call button itself. It was loose in its housing, wires visible. Plausible. I noted it in my handheld digital log, room 214 call light active, apparent malfunction, and continued. Later, near the sealed entrance to the psych wing, the air dropped several degrees. Not just cool, but bitingly cold, raising goosebumps on my arms. I shone my flashlight on the heavy doors, noticing the thick chain and padlock Gary mentioned. Were those scratch marks on the small, reinforced window set into the door? Deep gouges, running vertically down the inside pane. I stepped closer, peering through the grimy glass. Pitch black beyond. But I had the distinct, prickling sensation of being watched from the darkness within. I backed away quickly, the cold clinging to me. Probably just paranoia, the setting getting to me. Logged it, significant temperature drop near psych wing entrance. My final patrol before the shift change brought me past the ER bay again. As I walked by the ambulance entrance, a faint electronic beep. Beep. Beep echoed from inside one of recruits' training or trauma rooms. The rhythmic sound of a heart monitor. But everything in there was supposed to be powered down, disconnected. I cautiously pushed open the door. Silence. Empty gurneys stood like skeletal remains. Monitors were dark, screens blank. The beeping had stopped the moment I opened the door. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the blood pounding in my ears. Drafts. Bad wiring. Rats. Settling sounds. Gary's words echoed in my head. Plausible deniability. But the feeling lingered, a cold dread coiling in my gut. This place wasn't just empty. It felt occupied. I finished the patrol, my senses on high alert, my footsteps quicker than before. Back in the relative safety of the security office, watching the unchanging gray screens, I couldn't shake the feeling that the hospital was watching me back. The first shift was over. But something told me the worst was yet to come. The next few nights settled into a tense routine. Patrol, observe, log minor oddities. A door found unlocked that I distinctly remembered securing. The elevator sighing on a distant floor. Faint whispers that vanished when I turned my head, always seeming to come from just around the corner or inside an empty room. I diligently logged everything, my military training demanding precision even as my gut screamed that bad wiring wasn't cutting it anymore. Gary, on the brief shift overlaps, would just grunt at my reports, muttering about the place being a dump and ready for demolition. His cynicism was a strange sort of comfort, a shield against admitting something was genuinely wrong. But it was wearing thin. The inciting incident happened on my fifth night. I was back in the security office, halfway through a lukewarm cup of coffee, eyes scanning the monitors more out of habit than expectation. Suddenly, 3 screens, Ward C, the main lobby cam, and one covering the second-floor corridor near the old surgical suites, dissolved into harsh static simultaneously. Before I could even react, a piercing alarm blared through the building. Not the fire alarm, but a specific, repeating chime I recognized from hospital dramas, code blue. Cardiac arrest. My blood ran cold. On the main alert panel, a light flashed insistently, code blue, ICU or M3. ICU room 3. That wing had been stripped bare months ago. It was on the 3rd floor, technically off-limits per Gary's initial tour, though not as strictly sealed as the psych wing. Training kicked in, overriding disbelief. Code blue meant potential life or death, even if it made no logical sense. I grabbed my heavy flashlight and radioed Gary, even though he was off shift. Gary, Simmons. Got a code blue alert, ICU room 3. Heading up. Any chance maintenance left something powered? Static answered. Heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird, I sprinted towards the service elevator, the alarm echoing my frantic footsteps. The elevator groaned its way upwards, the flickering emergency light making the cramped space feel like a coffin. 3rd floor. The doors opened onto a corridor even darker and dustier than the lower levels. The air here was thick with the smell of stale chemicals and something else. Something like disinfectant failing to mask old sickness. The code blue alarm was louder here, bouncing off the tiled walls. I followed the sound, my flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. ICU room 3 was at the end of the hall. The door was closed. I pushed it open, braced for I don't know what. Empty. Absolutely empty. Dust lay thick as snow on the floor. The bed frame was there, but no mattress. Wires dangled from the wall where monitors used to be. The only equipment left was a discarded 4-stand leaning drunkenly in the corner. No patient. No intruder. No sign of any malfunction at the wall panel where the alert should have originated. And as I stood there, panting, flashlight beam dancing around the desolate room, the code blue alarm abruptly cut off. Silence crashed back in, heavier than before. I walked over to the wall panel. It was dead. No lights, no power. How had it triggered? I checked for tripwires, signs of forced entry, anything. Nothing. It was pristine, untouched except by time and dust. I radioed Gary again, my voice tight. Simmons to Gary. Reached ICU 3. It's empty. Completely dark, no power to the equipment panels. The alarm just stopped when I entered. False alarm, system ghost I guess. This time, Gary's voice crackled back, sounding tired but, for the first time, maybe a little less dismissive. Yeah, kid. Heard it kick off down here on my way out. Damn wiring. Told ya. Don't go chasing shadows up there. Just log it. Log it and stick to the main patrol route. There was a pause. Seriously, Mike. Stick to the route. He clicked off before I could respond. Walking back to the elevator, I felt exposed, unnerved. System ghost. The phrase echoed. As I passed an old nurse's station, the hospital's PA system crackled loudly above me, making me jump. A burst of static, then a faint, distorted voice, Doctor. Stat. Pediatrics. Followed by another wave of harsh static before cutting out. Pediatrics was on the 4th floor, even more derelict than the ICU. My hand tightened on the flashlight. It wasn't just equipment acting up anymore. The rest of the shift was punctuated by these auditory anomalies. Muffled crying seemed to emanate from an empty patient room in the geriatric ward as I passed, stopping the instant I paused to listen. Later, walking down the long corridor towards the morgue entrance in the basement connector, I heard distinct, overlapping whispers seeming to pace me just beyond the range of my flashlight beam. They were indistinct, sexless, but conveyed a feeling of urgency, of pleading. When I swung the light around, there was nothing but empty space and peeling paint. Each time it happened, I tried to pinpoint the source. An open vent? An old radio somewhere? But the sounds were too specific, too localized, and always vanished under direct attention. They felt less like random noises and more like echoes. Fragments of conversations and emotions trapped in the building's fabric. Back in the office, staring at the log entry for the code blue, Gary's dismissal felt different now. It wasn't cynicism, it was deliberate ignorance. He knew. He must have experienced things like this, maybe worse. His advice to stick to the route and don't chase shadows wasn't about faulty equipment, it was about self-preservation. Don't look too closely. Don't acknowledge what you hear or see. Just log it and keep walking until the sun comes up. But the code blue had been different. It wasn't a flicker or a whisper. It was loud, demanding, specific. Something had screamed for help from an empty room. And the hospital, or whatever resided within its decaying walls, now knew I was listening. The quiet wasn't quiet anymore. It was waiting. The nights after the code blue incident took on a sharper edge. The subtle oddities became less subtle, the atmosphere heavier, more watchful. And it started playing tricks on my eyes, especially through the distorted lens of the security monitors. It began with movement at the periphery. Watching the grainy feet of the long corridor leading to the emergency room bay, I'd catch a flicker, a dark shape darting across the hallway just at the edge of the frame, gone before I could properly focus. I'd rewind the primitive digital recorder, frame by frame. Nothing. Just shadows cast by the emergency lights, or maybe a large insect flying past the lens. Plausible deniability, always. But then it became more distinct. On the notoriously glitchy camera in Ward C, the one Gary told me to ignore, I saw it clearly for a split second. A figure, slumped in a wheelchair left abandoned in the middle of the hallway. Not detailed, just a dark, hunched shape. I switched cameras rapidly, cycling through views of the same area from different angles. Nothing there. Switched back to the Ward C cam, empty hallway. My heart hammered. Was the monitor itself malfunctioning, burning images onto the screen? Or was I seeing something real, something fleeting? A few nights later, monitoring the second floor near the old surgical suites, I saw a shape lying on one of the empty beds in a room whose door was slightly ajar. It looked unnervingly like a person under a sheet. I zoomed in as much as the ancient system allowed, the image pixelating into a blurry mess. Still, the shape was undeniable. I grabbed my keys and flashlight, my mouth dry. This required physical inspection. I took the service elevator, the ascent feeling agonizingly slow. Reaching the second floor, I moved cautiously down the corridor, flashlight beam cutting ahead. The door to the room was exactly as it appeared on camera, slightly open. I pushed it wider, sweeping the light inside. Empty bed. Bare mattress, stained and ripped in places. No figure. No sheet. Just dust and silence. I checked the room thoroughly, closets, the small adjoining bathroom. Nothing. Back in the security office, heart still racing, I rewound the footage again. There it was, the shape on the bed, clear as day on the recording for about 10 seconds before vanishing. It wasn't a glitch in the live feed. It was on the recording. But it wasn't there when I checked. How? Was the system recording echoes of the past? The visual disturbances weren't confined to the monitors. Patrolling the ground floor near the administrative wing, I walked past a series of offices with frosted glass doors. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement behind one, a silhouette passing by the glass. I stopped, shone my light directly at the door. Nothing. I tried the handle. Locked tight. I peered through the frosted glass, vague shapes of desks and filing cabinets were visible, but no movement. Yet, the impression had been distinct, someone walking inside that locked, empty office. The epicenter of the unease, however, remained the old psychiatric wing. Gary's warning echoed constantly, bad memories in there. Unstable section. Despite the heavy chains and padlock, I felt drawn to it, a morbid curiosity warring with primal fear. Strange sounds sometimes seemed to emanate from that direction, faint, dragging noises, or what sounded chillingly like rhythmic banging against metal. One particularly quiet night, around 3 a.m., I found myself standing before the sealed doors again. The intense cold radiated outwards, far colder than the ambient temperature of the rest of the hospital. I pressed my ear close to the gap between the heavy doors, straining to hear past the blood pounding in my own ears. This time, I heard it clearly, whispering. Not one voice, but many, overlapping, frantic, desperate. Impossible to make out words, just a tapestry of hushed, urgent sounds coming from the darkness beyond. My breath hitched. Looking down, I shone my light on the reinforced window again. The scratches I'd noticed before seemed deeper now, more numerous. Raw, white lines against the thick, grimy glass, originating from the inside. My stomach churned. I backed away quickly, the whispers seeming to follow me for a few steps before fading back into the oppressive silence. What happened in that wing? What kind of suffering left marks like that? It was around this time that the hospital's atmosphere started bleeding into my own head in a more personal way. The lingering scent of antiseptic, usually just a background note, would suddenly become overwhelmingly strong, momentarily transporting me back to the field medical tents overseas. The sharp, metallic tang wasn't just decay anymore, it smelled like the coppery scent of fresh blood after a night blast. The faint, muffled crying I sometimes heard down empty corridors started to sound distressingly like Sergeant Miller after he lost his leg. Was this place triggering my own baggage? The mild PTSD the VA shrink had diagnosed me with, the difficulty readjusting that Gary's cynicism seemed to echo? Or was the hospital itself using my memories, my vulnerabilities, against me? The line blurred. I found myself constantly questioning my perceptions. Was that shadow real, or a flashback? Was that whisper part of the building's memory, or mine? The psychological decay the logline mentioned wasn't just the buildings, it felt like it was starting within me. The pragmatic soldier, trained to observe and react logically, was struggling against an enemy he couldn't see, couldn't quantify, couldn't fight. An enemy that seemed to know exactly where his own cracks were. The shadows weren't just on the monitors anymore, they were stretching into my mind. Part of the nightly checklist, unavoidable and universally dreaded according to Gary's initial rundown, was the morgue check. Deep in the basement, accessible via a rattling service elevator or a long, echoing concrete stairwell that felt like descending into the earth's bowels. The task was simple: ensure the refrigeration units still had power from the backup generator, check that the main access doors in the autopsy suite were secure. Simple on paper. In reality, it was the longest walk of the night. I usually saved it for last, just before the gray hint of dawn started softening the oppressive night. Tonight, however, felt different. The visual anomalies on the monitors and the unnerving whispers near the psych wing had left me jumpy, raw. Delaying the inevitable felt like cowardice. Around 1 a.m., I grabbed my heaviest flashlight and headed for the basement stairwell, deciding to forego the groaning elevator. The air grew noticeably colder with each step down, the silence becoming absolute, broken only by the scuff of my boots on the gritty concrete. The stairwell opened into a wide, low-ceilinged corridor lit by bare bulbs caged in wire mesh. Pipes snaked overhead, dripping occasionally with condensation that echoed like gunshots in the stillness. The morgue was at the far end, behind heavy, stainless steel double doors. Taking a deep breath, I pushed them open. The main holding area was starkly utilitarian. Rows of refrigerated body drawers lined one wall, gleaming dully under the fluorescent lights. Their handles looked like silent, waiting mouths. An empty gurney stood near the center of the room. The chill in here was profound, seeping into my bones. I moved quickly, checking the temperature gauges on the refrigeration units. All green, humming softly. Power was good. Next, the autopsy suite. A smaller room connected by a swinging door. I pushed it open. White tile, gleaming stainless steel table under a harsh overhead light, drains in the floor. Empty. Clinically clean, yet radiating a sense of profound violation. As I stood there, verifying the lock on the exterior window, I heard it. A distinct clatter from the main holding room behind me. Like a metal tray hitting the floor. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the doorway. Nothing. The main room was exactly as I'd left it. No fallen tray, no sign of disturbance. My heart hammered against my ribs. Just the building settling? A rat? But the sound had been sharp, metallic, close. My skin prickled. I needed to finish the check and get out. I turned back to the wall of refrigerated drawers, needing to confirm each one was securely latched as per the protocol. As I ran my hand along the cold metal handles, checking the locks, I heard another sound. A soft, distinct click from the far end of the row. Like one of the heavy drawers had been unlocked from the inside. I froze, flashlight beam fixed on the drawer in question. Drawer number 7. It looked identical to the others, securely closed. But I heard the latch click. My training screamed at me to investigate rationally, but every nerve ending screamed danger. I forced myself to walk towards it, footsteps echoing too loudly. Reaching drawer 7, I hesitated, then slowly reached out. The handle was colder than the others, unnaturally so. And there, clinging to the polished steel, was a faint bloom of condensation, like someone had just breathed on it from the inside. That was it. Protocol be damned. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off the wall of drawers, expecting one to slide open at any moment. Then, a faint sound, barely audible above the hum of the coolers. A soft, wet sigh. It seemed to come from near drawer 7, a sound of weary release, or perhaps final expiration. Pure, unadulterated dread washed over me, colder than the morgue air. My military instincts, usually focused on identifiable threats, were useless here. This was something else entirely. I backed out of the main holding room, pulling the heavy steel doors shut behind me with more force than necessary. The click of the lock engaging felt pitifully inadequate. I practically ran back up the concrete stairs, the sounds and the chilling condensation seared into my brain. Back on the ground floor, the relative warmth felt like a blessing, but the sense of violation lingered. The hospital wasn't just echoing past events anymore, it felt like something was actively trying to interact, to provoke. The rest of the shift confirmed it. Equipment malfunctions escalated beyond simple flickers. Around 3 a.m., the main bank of elevators, supposedly powered down, suddenly whirred to life, The indicator lights showed multiple cars moving between floors, stopping randomly, doors opening onto dark, empty shafts. I watched on the monitors, frozen, as the car nearest the security office ascended to the 4th floor, paused, then descended rapidly to the basement, stopping right outside the morgue doors. No one had called them. Later, patrolling the East Wing, the emergency lights in the entire corridor suddenly flickered and died, plunging me into absolute, suffocating darkness. My flashlight beam felt tiny, swallowed by the void. Panic surged, tasting metallic in my mouth. I fumbled for my radio, my fingers clumsy with adrenaline. Just as I was about to call it in, the backup power kicked in with a hum, casting the hallway in an eerie half-light once more. It wasn't random anymore. The timing felt deliberate, isolating me, testing my limits. The hospital was no longer just a haunted house, it felt like a predator, playing with its prey. And the night was far from over. The phenomena were becoming more immersive, less like passive observations and more like brief, violent intrusions into my reality. It wasn't just sounds and shadows anymore, it was like walking through pockets of raw, undiluted human misery. The hospital wasn't just haunted by echoes, it was the echo. One night, doing my rounds near the emergency room bay, a sprawling area of triage rooms, trauma bays, and waiting areas, all silent and dark, the air suddenly became thick and electric. For maybe 10-15 seconds, the silence was shattered. I was overwhelmed by the phantom chaos of a busy Saturday night. Frantic voices shouting medical jargon, BP dropping. Need suction. Charging paddles. Clear. The frantic beeping of multiple monitors, the squeal of gurney wheels on linoleum, the sharp, gut-wrenching sound of someone sobbing uncontrollably. It wasn't just hearing it, I could feel the panic, the desperation, the adrenaline. My own heart rate spiked in response, my training kicking in, scanning for the source of the emergency before I consciously registered it wasn't real. Then, as quickly as it started, silence slammed back down, leaving only the hum of the emergency lights and the frantic pounding of my own pulse. I leaned against the wall, breathing heavily, the ghostly sound still ringing in my ears. It happened again near the old maternity ward on the 2nd floor. A place usually just cold and quiet, suddenly filled with the faint, overlapping cries of newborns. Not distressed cries, but the normal, lusty sounds of healthy babies. And underneath it, almost subliminal, the soft, rhythmic cadence of a woman humming a lullaby. It was strangely peaceful, yet profoundly unsettling in the context of the decaying, empty ward. It lasted only moments, a fragile bubble of sound that burst, leaving the silence feeling even heavier. Even seemingly benign areas weren't immune. Walking past a standard patient room, door slightly ajar, I was hit by an overwhelming wave of scent, not just antiseptic, but the thick, cloying smell of advanced sickness, mingled with the unmistakable odor of human despair. It was suffocating, visceral. I didn't hear or see anything, but the feeling that washed over me was one of utter hopelessness, of someone lying in that bed, waiting for an end that couldn't come soon enough. I recoiled, pulling the door shut, the feeling clinging to me like a shroud. These sensory replays were disorienting, emotionally draining. They weren't targeted attacks, not like the morgue incident felt. They seemed more like ambient residue, moments of intense emotion, trauma, birth, death, suffering, imprinted onto the very fabric of the building, replaying themselves like psychic glitches in time. During the long, quiet hours in the security office, between patrols, I started using the spotty Wi-Fi on my phone to dig into St. Jude's Mercy Hospital's history. The official closure notices cited budget shortfalls and the need for modernization. But local news archives and online forums painted a much darker picture. St. Jude's, particularly in its later years, had been notoriously underfunded and understaffed. There were articles detailing malpractice lawsuits, surgical errors resulting in death or permanent injury, patients developing infections due to poor sanitation, neglect in the long-term care wings. Overcrowding was rampant, especially in the ER, leading to tragically long wait times. Mortality rates in certain departments, the ICU I'd visited, the surgical unit, and particularly the old psychiatric wing, were significantly higher than state averages. I found specific incidents linked to the areas where I'd experienced the most intense activity. A small fire in the West Wing near Ward C, started by faulty equipment, that resulted in smoke inhalation deaths. Reports of a violent patient incident in the ER several years back, requiring massive security intervention. Whispers online about a renowned surgeon who lost several patients under questionable circumstances in the old operating theater before abruptly retiring. And the psych wing. The articles were vague, citing patient privacy, but forum posts from former staff, anonymous, of course, spoke of harsh, outdated treatment methods, patient suicides brushed under the rug, and an atmosphere of pervasive fear and control. The abrupt closure, it seemed, wasn't just about budgets, it was about sweeping decades of suffering under the rug before the whole rotten structure collapsed under the weight of its own history. A theory began to form in my mind, less supernatural, perhaps, but no less terrifying. This wasn't about individual ghosts haunting specific rooms. It was the building itself. Saturated, soaked through with decades of concentrated pain, fear, trauma, and death. Like a psychic sponge that had absorbed too much, the abrupt closure and abandonment hadn't cleansed it, it had trapped all that raw emotional energy inside. The phenomena weren't spirits trying to communicate, they were echoes, fragments of intense moments replaying themselves, amplified by the decay, the silence, and the specific architectural resonance of the place. The building itself was screaming, endlessly replaying its greatest traumas. And I was the only one there to hear it. The thought offered a strange kind of explanation, but no comfort at all. Because if the building itself was the source, how could you possibly escape it? Amidst the cacophony of ambient suffering and random malfunctions, something else began to emerge. A more focused, recurring presence. It wasn't just the building groaning under the weight of its past anymore, I started feeling distinctly watched. It often happened at the periphery of my vision, especially down the long, straight corridors where the emergency lights cast deep shadows. A flicker of movement at the far end. When I'd raise my flashlight, there would be nothing there. But the impression lingered, tall, indistinct, clad in white. Sometimes, I'd catch a momentary reflection in the dark glass of a locked door or a blank monitor screen as I passed, a figure standing silently behind me, gone when I turned. It wasn't aggressive, not like the clattering tray in the morgue or the sudden darkness in the East Wing. It was observational. Silent. Still. Vaguely humanoid, often perceived as wearing something like an old-fashioned nurse's uniform or a doctor's coat, stark white against the gloom. I started calling it the Watcher in White in my mental log. Its appearances seemed tied to certain locations. I saw it most frequently near the entrance to the sealed psychiatric wing, a pale figure standing just beyond the reach of my flashlight beam, motionless by the chained doors. Other times, it would manifest near the old surgical theaters on the second floor, a silent silhouette framed in the frosted glass of the hors doors. It never made a sound, never moved towards me. It just watched. Was this a specific entity? The ghost of a particular nurse or doctor? Or was it something else, a composite manifestation of the hospital's authority, its history of care warped into silent judgment or neglect? I didn't know. The ambiguity was part of the terror. It felt intelligent, aware, unlike the raw, replaying emotions elsewhere. Then, subtly at first, it began to feel personal. The Watcher started appearing more frequently during my specific patrol routes, almost as if anticipating my movements. One night, walking past a nurse's station on the relatively modern third floor, I found a dusty metal clipboard lying open on the counter. I hadn't noticed it before. Curious, I shone my light on it. The top sheet was an old patient intake form, mostly blank, but scrawled in faded blue ink near the bottom, in a section marked prior injuries/conditions, were two words, right tibia. Fragmentation. My blood ran cold. That was specific. Too specific. It matched the shrapnel injury I'd sustained overseas, the one that still gave me grief in cold weather. An injury detailed deep in my military medical records, not something casually known. Coincidence? A random chart left behind? Or had something put it there for me to find? Had the Watcher left it? The feeling of being observed intensified, becoming a feeling of being assessed. A few nights later, the PA system crackled again. Not the usual burst of static or fragmented medical calls. This time, it was a single, distorted word, stretched and warped, but recognizable, Sergeant. My old rank. Spoken into the dead air of the empty hospital. It was followed by a sound like drawn-out, electronic feedback, then silence. My hand went instinctively to the sidearm. I wasn't allowed to carry on this civilian job. The fine hairs on my neck stood on end. This wasn't random residue. This felt targeted. Something in this hospital knew who I was. Knew my past. The breaking point, however, wasn't for me, but for Gary. I arrived for my shift one evening to find a different guard at the gate, a young kid who looked barely out of high school and scared stiff. "Where's Gary?" I asked. "Called in this morning," the kid mumbled, avoiding my eyes. "Said he's taking extended leave. Effective immediately. Something about family emergency." I looked past him at the looming hospital, its windows like vacant eyes in the dusk. Gary didn't strike me as the type for sudden family emergencies. He struck me as the type to endure anything for a paycheck, just like me. He'd seen something. Or maybe, after years of cynical dismissal, something had finally broken through his defenses. The kid handed me the keys and the logbook. Tucked inside the logbook was a folded piece of paper. Gary's familiar scrawl. Not a resignation note, just 3 hastily written sentences. Kid. This place. It gets inside your head. Don't let it. Just watch the clock and get out. Gee. His abrupt departure, coupled with the genuinely fearful tone of the note, so different from his usual weary sarcasm, hit me harder than any phantom whisper. He was gone. Whatever lurked in St. Jude's, I was facing it alone now. And the watcher in white, I felt with chilling certainty, was waiting. I'd put in my notice. 2 more shifts. That was it. The money wasn't worth the ragged state of my nerves, the creeping psychological tendrils of this place wrapping around my own past traumas. Gary's sudden departure sealed it. But St. Jude's, it seemed, wasn't ready to let me go quietly. My penultimate night shift became a descent into chaos, a crescendo of all the haunting phenomena amplified to an unbearable pitch. It wasn't just random events anymore, it felt like a coordinated assault. Code Black. Not an official hospital term, but the only phrase that fit the sheer, unadulterated terror of that night. It started subtly, around midnight. The flickering monitor in Ward C didn't just flicker, it went completely black, then snapped back on showing the hallway, but subtly distorted, warped, as if viewed through water. Then, the call button lights began flashing, not just 1 or 2, but dozens, all across different floors, blinking erratically like a corrupted Christmas display on the main panel. Then the alarms began. Not just one code blue, but multiple alerts simultaneously. Code red, fire, from the derelict kitchen. Code silver, active shooter, from the empty administrative wing. A code violet, violent patient, seemingly triggered from inside the sealed psychiatric wing. The security office filled with a cacophony of different chimes and sirens, a maddening symphony of emergencies that couldn't possibly be real. The PA system exploded. Not static or fragmented whispers this time, but a flood of overlapping sounds. Agonized screams cut through distorted medical announcements. Prayers muttered in desperation warred with harsh, guttural sobbing. Fragments of lullabies twisted into something menacing. And underneath it all, a low, continuous electronic hum that vibrated through the floor, through the desk, into my bones. Then, piercing through the chaos, clear as a bell but utterly chilling, Simmons. Michael Simmons. My full name, spoken in a cold, synthesized voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Panic clotted my throat. I slammed my hands over my ears, but the sounds were inside my head as much as outside. On the monitors, every screen flickered wildly. Shadow figures weren't just darting at the periphery anymore, they were in the hallways, multiple dark shapes moving with unnatural speed, converging, dispersing. And there, on the camera feed aimed directly at the security office door, the watcher in white. Standing just outside, perfectly still, its features obscured by the grainy image and the poor lighting, but its attention undeniably fixed on me. Suddenly, a deafening bang echoed from down the hall. Then another, and another. Doors. Doors slamming open and shut with violent force throughout the building. I could hear them even over the alarm chaos, heavy fire doors, patient room doors, office doors, banging like a mad, percussive rhythm against the walls. On the monitors, I saw them, doors swinging wildly on empty corridors, propelled by unseen forces. Then came the sound from below. A low, scraping, metallic groan, traveling up through the building's structure. Distinctly audible even amidst the pandemonium. The sound of heavy, refrigerated drawers sliding open in the basement. In the morgue. My stomach lurched violently. This wasn't just residual energy anymore. This was active. Hostile. It felt like the hospital itself, the collective agony trapped within its walls, was having a final, violent convulsion, focusing all its despair and rage directly onto me, its sole occupant. And it knew exactly how to wound me. Mixed in with the hospital sounds, I started hearing other noises. The distinct thump-thump-thump of incoming helicopter rotors. The crackle of battlefield radio chatter. A sudden, sharp crack like rifle fire echoing down the linoleum hallway outside. The screams began to sound like men I'd known, men I'd lost. The antiseptic smell intensified, thick with the phantom scent of cordite and burning fuel. My PTSD wasn't just being triggered, it was being weaponized by the environment. The watcher in white flickered on the monitor outside my door. For a split second, its vague form resolved into something horrifyingly familiar, The face of Corporal Davis, the young medic who bled out in my arms outside Kandahar, his eyes wide with shock and accusation. I recoiled, gasping, stumbling back from the console. That's what it wanted. To break me. To paralyze me with fear, drown me in my own trauma mirrored by the hospital's endless suffering. But something else kicked in. Deeper than the fear, older than the trauma. Muscle memory. Training. Survival. Focus. My breathing hitched, ragged, but I forced it into a controlled rhythm, just like we practiced. Assess the threat. Identify objective. Execute. The threat was the environment itself, the psychological assault. The objective? Survive until dawn. Or, maybe, fight back in the only way I could. The main electrical distribution panel was in the basement, near the morgue. Risky. Insane, even. But if I could initiate a building-wide power cutoff, maybe, just maybe, it would disrupt whatever energy was fueling this nightmare. Silence the alarms, the PA, the monitors. Plunge the place into true darkness, but maybe also into true silence. I grabbed my heavy flashlight, checked the battery. Took the spare. Keys clipped securely to my belt. Radio off, useless now. Moving out of the relative safety of the office felt like stepping into enemy territory. The corridor lights flickered violently, casting strobe-like shadows that danced with the phantom figures I glimpsed from the corners of my eyes. Doors continued to slam rhythmically. The cacophony from the PA system clawed at my sanity. Tactical movement. Stay close to the walls. Check corners. Flashlight beam sweeping methodically, cutting through the chaos. Every shadow seemed to writhe. Every echo sounded like a footstep behind me. The battlefield sounds intertwined seamlessly with the hospital horrors. A gurney rattling past sounded like incoming rounds, a sudden medical alarm like an RPG detonation. Down the stairwell to the basement. The air grew colder, the sound slightly muffled but the deep, vibrating hum intensified. The morgue doors at the end of the corridor stood slightly ajar. A deep dread pulsed from within. I didn't need to go in there, just past it, to the electrical room adjacent. As I crept past the morgue entrance, I risked a quick glance inside. The overhead lights flickered weakly. Several of the refrigerated drawers were open. Dark, empty cavities gaping in the wall. And standing by the autopsy table, bathed in the flickering light, was the watcher in white. Not resembling Davis this time, just the tall, pale, indistinct figure. It slowly turned its head towards me, a silent, knowing acknowledgement. I didn't wait. I lunged for the electrical room door, fumbling with the key in the lock, the key scraping loudly in the mechanism. The door swung open. Inside, rows of heavy circuit breakers lined the wall, buzzing loudly. The main cutoff lever was huge, painted red, clearly marked. Behind me, a slow, dragging footstep echoed from the morgue. My hand closed around the cold, heavy plastic of the main breaker. With a grunt, fueled by adrenaline and sheer terror, I threw all my weight into it. The lever resisted for a moment, then slammed down with a deafening clunk. And the world ended. Absolute darkness. Absolute silence. The alarms died. The PA system cut out mid-scream. The buzzing of the breaker ceased. Even the low, vibrating hum vanished. Plunged into a void deeper and more complete than any I had experienced before. For a terrifying second, I thought I'd stopped my own heart. Then, only the sound of my own ragged breathing in the pitch black. Had it worked? Or had I just trapped myself in the dark with whatever waited outside the door? The silence was absolute, terrifying in its own way after the preceding chaos. The darkness was total, pressing in, broken only by the weak beam of my flashlight. I stood frozen in the electrical room for what felt like an eternity, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no whispers, no alarms. Just the frantic thumping of my own heart against my ribs and the distant, reassuring drip of water somewhere in the basement pipes. Slowly, cautiously, I edged out of the electrical room, sweeping the flashlight beam down the corridor towards the morgue. The doors were still ajar, gaping into blackness. No watcher. No sound. It felt empty. Truly empty, for the first time since I'd started working here. Cutting the power seemed to have pulled the plug on the phenomena, severing the connection that allowed the building's trauma to manifest so violently. Getting back upstairs through the pitch-black stairwells was a nerve-wracking ordeal in itself, relying solely on my flashlight and muscle memory. The upper floors felt different too. Still creepy, still decaying, but the oppressive weight, the feeling of being watched, the constant tension of waiting for the next thing, it was gone. It was just a dark, empty building now. A derelict shell. I spent the remaining hours of my shift in the security office, the monitors blank, the The radio silent. Just me, my flashlight, and the profound darkness outside the small pool of light I created. I didn't patrol again. There was no need. Whatever energy had animated St. Jude's horror seemed to have retreated, dispersed, or simply been silenced by the lack of power. As the first, tentative hints of gray began to soften the eastern sky, filtering through the grimy windows of the lobby, a sense of profound relief washed over me, so intense it almost brought me to my knees. I had survived. Not just the shift, but the place itself. When the first rays of actual sunlight pierced the gloom, casting long, dust-filled beams across the lobby floor, the effect was instantaneous. The lingering sense of dread evaporated completely, like mist burning off in the morning sun. The hospital looked pathetic now, just peeling paint, stained floors, and forgotten equipment. Powerless. Mundane. I didn't wait for my relief to arrive. I gathered my meager belongings, dropped the keys and the now useless radio on the security desk, and walked out the main entrance into the cool morning air. I didn't look back. I walked down the cracked driveway, past the security shack Gary used to inhabit, and kept walking until St. Jude's Mercy Hospital was just a dark shape in my rearview mirror, shrinking, but never quite disappearing. I called the security company later that day, told them I quit, effective immediately. Didn't give a reason. They didn't seem surprised. Maybe Gary wasn't the first. Trying to explain what happened in there. It's difficult. How do you describe the feeling of walking through pockets of phantom sound? The chilling certainty of being watched by something that isn't there? The way a building's history can seep into your own psyche and trigger your deepest fears? People nod politely. They talk about stress, fatigue, PTSD flashbacks triggered by an unsettling environment. Logical explanations. And maybe they're partly right. The place definitely got inside my head, just like Gary warned. But they weren't there. They didn't see the shape on the monitor that wasn't there in person. They didn't hear the code blue from a dead room, or their own rank whispered by a dead PA system. They didn't feel that unnatural cold by the psych wing or find condensation on a morgue drawer handle. They didn't face the watcher in white. Months have passed. I found a new job, warehouse logistics. Mundane, noisy, blessedly normal. I pay my rent on time. I sleep better, mostly. But St. Jude's left its mark. I avoid hospitals, even for routine checkups if I can help it. Old buildings make my skin crawl. Sometimes, when I'm stressed or overtired, I hear it, a faint, phantom beep. Beep. Beep, like a distant heart monitor. Or I catch a whiff of that unique smell, antiseptic trying, and failing, to mask decay. Just last week, I was waiting in a brightly lit, modern clinic for a flu shot. Stainless steel, clean lines, nothing like St. Jude's. But I glanced up at the acoustic ceiling tiles, down the long, sterile corridor. And for a fraction of a second, it hit me. That familiar, heavy dread. The feeling of unseen suffering pressing in from the walls, the weight of countless unspoken tragedies. My breath caught. I looked away quickly, focusing on the cheerful posters on the wall, the daytime TV murmuring in the corner. The feeling passed. But I knew, with a chilling certainty, that a part of St. Jude's Mercy Hospital, and the echoes of suffering it contained, would always be lurking just beneath the surface. Waiting. Some places don't just haunt you. They become a part of you. Never again. Enjoyed this story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.